Greetings, programs. Want to learn how to create some Tron light cycle rezzing and de-rezzing effects in Unreal Engine? Maybe even some stuff you can adapt to motion design? Okay, let's enter the grid. Hey, Aharon Rabinowitz here for School of Motion. This weekend, Tron Ares was released in theaters, and while I love a good Tron update, nothing beats the classics. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use chaos fracturing and a new cloner feature recently added to the Unreal Engine motion design tools to simulate rezzing up a light cycle and a little de-rezzing and destruction as well. You'll also be able to use these same techniques for motion design. So let's fight for the user and make this happen. To build this project, I used the film, video, and live events template called Motion Design. This is a template that's designed specifically for the motion design tools, and you don't have to use this template to use them, but it sets up a lot of the stuff that you would have to do manually otherwise. So I use that. Now I'm also building this project in Unreal Engine 5.7's preview. 5.7 isn't out at the time that I record this, but the reason I'm using the 5.7 preview is that they fixed a pretty significant bug in 5.6 with one of the motion design tools that is critical for this effect. So 5.7 preview, it's available, anyone can download it and use it. And once 5.7, the full version comes out, you'll be able to do that as well. Okay, so now let's jump into it. Now in this project file, you're going to find a whole bunch of different stuff, but if you scroll down to this Tron example right here, within that, there is an area called Mesh, a folder, and within that, there is a light cycle classic. This is a light cycle that I had built for this project so that you can use it for your own stuff. Obviously, you don't want to get sued by Disney, so I don't know if you can use it in any professional stuff, but you can use it in your own work as you play around in fan films and all that kind of stuff. This is a classic light cycle, and I put it together in a blueprint. So if I drop this blueprint into the shot, and I'm just going to set its position to 0, 0, 0, we'll pull in here. So you can see when I select the blueprint that there's actually three parts. There's the wheel back, the wheel front, and the main body. And so you can, rotate these wheels if you wanted to. We're not going to really be working with any of that here, but yeah, this is a model that is designed after the original Tron movie, 1982. And we're just going to run the effects here. So first thing we have to do is convert this into a single static mesh. That's really important for the effect we're trying to do. You could break it up into the three parts, the wheels, and just do the effect 3 times over, but it feels like a lot for what we're trying to do. So with my blueprint selected, I'll be sure to select my complete blueprint, not just the individual objects that are here. So I'll just make sure to select the blueprint. And with that, the actor menu appears right here. And I'll click on this and I'm going to choose Convert BP Light Cycle Classic to Static Mesh. And the static mesh options come up here. First thing is to just choose a folder. So I'm going to go to Tron Example, and I'm just going to go and put it right in the mesh area that we had here, Light Cycle Classic, right inside of there. And I'm going to name this Light Cycle Unified. And I'll click Save. And there it is. Now I'm just going to choose Save All, so I don't lose my work. And I'll remove this blueprint from the scene. And I'll drop the light cycle unified right there. And again, reset the position. Okay, now that we've got this light cycle in here, we have to break it up. And the way to do that is to just go into the chaos fracture mode right here. So you choose fracture, and this will bring up fracture options. Now, before you can break the object apart, the first thing we have to do is turn it into what's called a geometry collection. So with the object selected, with my static mesh selected, I'm going to choose New. And then from there, I'll just bring this over here, and I'm going to go into a folder that I created called Fracture. You can create your own folder and do whatever you want there, but I'm creating a folder called Fracture, and I'm just going to call this GC Light Cycle, and that is Geometry Collection Light Cycle, and I'll create the Geometry Collection. This instantly swaps out my unified mesh for the geometry collection that's here. Now, before we fracture this thing into lots of little pieces, we're going to do some work ahead of things just to make it a little easier on us later. So let me just bring this down so we have some room to see everything up here. And you can see that right now it's got the one material for the whole thing. And what I want to do is add another material slot so that we have something on the inside. You don't necessarily have to do this, but I will tell you that sometimes Unreal does some unpredictable things if we don't plan ahead for it. So what I'll do is just come up here and I'll choose Add Material Slot. And you can see now there's 2 slots, and it's got this index 1 material, which is actually the same material as this one right here. And that's totally fine for what we're going to do right now. I'm going to scroll down a little further, and I'm just going to choose assign material, and I'm going to choose 1. That's the second of the materials, and only for internal faces. And I'm going to choose assign materials. So to be clear, what we've done here is told it that when things break apart, there should be an internal material, and that material should be that second slot. We can make changes to that material later, but for now, we're just going to keep it as is. The next thing to do is shatter this thing. And with this object selected, I'm going to choose brick right here. And I'm going to pull back a little bit, and we can see what this looks like. I'm going to go with something like 12 by 12 by 12. So the brick length is going to be 12, the height is 12, and the depth is 12. If we look, we get some very nice looking grid-like bricks, and they should all be square, and they are. Okay, so we're going to choose fracture. This could take a little while as it breaks apart the object, so hang in there. Once that's done, we can actually see that this has been broken up into over 1,500 pieces. And, you know, there's a fracture hierarchy over here where you can select the individual pieces if you want to. But in this case, we're just going to leave this as is. And we're going to immediately convert these into their own meshes. So right now, it's just a single geometry collection. If I deselect, it's this one object. You can see what it looks like. Each of these colors represents a different brick. And if I select it, I can actually even go to, if I go to my outliner and select this, I can choose bone. And if I type in bone, I can choose show bone colors. That turns off. So if I deselect it, now it looks like exactly what it is. So you can see that even though it's been shattered, you really can't tell the difference between the shattered version and the unshattered version. Okay, so now with this selected, I'm going to go down to another utility that's at the bottom here, and it's called To Mesh. And I click on this, and the options come up for how to set up this mesh. So what we want to do is make sure that we center the pivots so that each one of these bricks has its pivot point at the center. That is super critical for the cloners that we're going to put it in, because the cloners use the pivot point to determine where the object is within the cloners. Don't worry about it too much, just know that you need to turn this on. The other thing I want to do is right here where it says odd materials are internal. We don't need this. We created an internal material. If you leave this checked on, it'll double the materials. So just let's leave that alone, and then let's hit convert. Now it wants to know where it should save each of these individual cubes, essentially. So we're going to create a new folder here, and I'm going to call it parts. And then I'm going to choose parts right here, and we'll click on save. And it just wants to know where they should be named and where they should be saved. Let's choose save and let it do its thing. Once all of those little bits and pieces are saved, you're going to see something that may freak you out, which is this weird stuff right here. And you're like, oh no, it's a mess now. But actually what's happening is there's competing geometries sitting in the same space. That's this original geometry collection and all of these individual pieces. So I'm just going to delete the geometry collection right here. And what we've got looks like a really nice version of the light cycle right here. Looks good. Okay, now the fun stuff. I'm just going to switch this for a moment back into selection, and I'm going to click on this motion design button, which will set up everything properly for motion design. We're going to use one of the cloners in here, and it's just best to have things set up this way. The one thing I don't love is the camera view that they have here. So I'm going to change this from camera right here to the default viewport. And you know, I like the way things rotate and move. And now let's go over to the cloners. And you might have noticed that in 5.6, they updated the cloners a bit to have their own clone setups. Originally, there was only one cloner, and then you would choose one of these options, and they're all still there, but they've just set up a bunch that are standard so that you don't have to go in and tweak every little thing. But there is a new one that was added in 5.6, and that's the free placement cloner. This one's super cool. It allows you to take any object with multiple parts and drop it into the cloner, and it keeps the position of those original parts. And then you can treat each of those objects as if they were clones. It gives you all of the cool things that you can do with a cloner, but with a bunch of meshes. Now, in this case, we've created 1,500 meshes. That's our light cycle pieces. And we're going to drop this free placement cloner in right here. And I'm just going to reset the position and the rotation. And if I come to my outliner, we can see we've got this default clone. That's this cube. I'm going to remove that. And then I'm going to take all of this geometry that we've created, these GC light cycle pieces, and I'm going to set them to movable, right? Because I want them to go into this parent and they need to be movable to do that. It takes a moment to think that through and adjust them all. And as soon as it's done that, I can then drag all of these into this cloner. Once I do that, it's going to think about things for a moment, and then it's going to set everything up. By the way, this is a great moment to save all in case you haven't. So File, Save All. And now let's start the process of animating the breakup. Now to animate the clones, we need an effector. And so with my cloner selected, I'm just going to come down over to here where it says effector, and I'm going to create a linked effector. Now, just so you can understand what you're seeing here, the red area is the strongest area of effect. So whatever effect you tell the effector to have on this object, that's where the strongest part's going to be. The blue is the fall off. So this is the end of the fall off. Anything outside of it, there's no effect. So there's some things we need to decide about the effector. For example, what shape is it? What does it do? And what kind of fall off does it have? So let's take a look. Let's start with, right now it's set to sphere. I'm going to leave that for just a moment. I'm going to come down a little further. And right now it's set to offset, which decides that when it hits the clones, will it offset them a certain amount, push them off in the X and the Y, whatever it is. We're not going to use that for this one. We're going to choose procedural, and then we're going to choose curl noise. And we're going to crank up the location strength. And what we're going to see is that as we crank up this location strength, the pieces start to break apart. Now, I want them to be a lot more random, but because the frequency of the noise that's being used is so small, it's just happening in big chunks. So what we want to do is really crank up this frequency a ton, and that really breaks things apart. Of course, this is like way too much. So what I'm going to do is come back up here, and I'm going to set it to 20, offset Y by 20, and offset Z by 20. And then I can see that I probably want to break the frequency up even more. Okay, so we've got this. And we could also have it rotate, right? We can get some rotation strength here if we wanted some rotation. But I don't want that. We have rotation for X, Y, and Z. And I think that for this kind of effect, we'd want to keep them all squares that would align properly. Also, by the way, we could try things like the scale strength if you wanted to scale it down. So if I set this to 0, some of the clones would go down to 0 while others would stay big. Again, same reason that the noise affects each part differently. Some of the noise pushes it in one direction, some in another. So some of the things would scale differently. We're not going to do scale here either because we're going to use another cloner for that. So we've got this broken apart here, and I also want to set it up so that rather than being a sphere that as I move the sphere out, it affects things, I want to use a plane so that as it passes, it goes from one state to another. So I'm going to go over here where it says sphere, and I'm going to change it to a plane. And then I'm going to rotate this plane a little bit like this, go 90. And then if I move this object, this effector, it's doing this. Now I want this to also draw on as this moves through it, right? So the way to do that is to create another effector, and this one is going to be for offset. So probably the easiest way to do this is just to duplicate my effector, and I'm going to name the first one effector noise. And I'm going to name the second one effector scale. And on this scale one, I'm going to change this from procedural to offset, and I'm going to set its scale everything here down to 0. And so as this effector moves through, the parts all go from being nothing, being small, to full-sized. And the cool thing is, if we move these two things together, it draws on. Pretty cool. Also, with both selected, I want to change their easing from linear to something like cubic. So I can try to find in-out cubic right there. And then I also want to just change the plane spacing from 200. That's like the fall off here. Try 100 and see how that looks. And then let's try moving these together again. No, maybe 200 is better. So I'll go back to that. And that makes the fall off a little longer. Okay, so the other thing I want to have both of these at the same position. I'm just going to reset their position in the middle. And then I also want to create an actor and stick these effectors inside of it. So let me just go right here and I'll choose basic and actor. And I'm just going to reset the position of this actor so it's also in the middle. And I'm going to take these two effectors and drop them in. And then we can rename the actor Effectors. So now when I move this Effectors actor, both move together. And we're actually going to add another one in a few moments just to create a glow as it's doing this as well. Now, to get the glow, we've got to work with the material node system, and that can be daunting for some people. So I'm stepping outside the project for a moment to set up something super simple so that it makes sense, and then we can use that in our more complex project. So right now I'm just using the standard template that comes with Unreal. So when you go to File and you go to New Level, one of the options, if you've chosen the motion design template, is this one right here. And so I've chose 3D motion graphics and I've made some changes to it to keep things nice and simple. Okay, so we've got this, and there's this cloner that has these cubes and this effector that moves through and affects the noise, just like we're doing with our light cycle. But it's a very simple material. And what we're going to do is create a new material to apply to this cube. So first thing is right click, choose material, go to new material here, and I'm going to promote the base color to a parameter of black right there. And I'm going to do the same with the emissive color, promote to a parameter. And this one will make sort of this blue color right here, maybe a little bit darker, just like that. And I'm going to click on apply and click on save because it's really important. Once we do that, I can select the default cubes right here and I can apply this material. And when I do, we can see that it's now, even though the material is black, because there has a light blue emissive channel, we can see the emissive color. And I'm going to come back into this material and we're going to create a sort of a system that says, hey, when an effector gets near the clones, I want it to glow this blue color. Otherwise, I want it to be black. To make that happen, I'm going to right click here and I'm going to choose cloner. And there's this option here called cloner effector parameters. And what this does is has all these different features that sort of plug in, that read information from the cloners and the effectors. And the one we want to work with here is called effector total weight, which says basically that when the effector is touching the object or near it, the weight gets heavier, right? So right now it's outputting black, and it's a black and white mask essentially. So when there's no weight from the effectors, it's black. When there is weight from the effectors, it's white. And so we want to have it that as the effectors move closer to the cloners, that this mask changes from black to white. So we've got this effector total weight. And if I were to just drop this and replace the emissive color and click on save, so now watch what happens. We set it up so that as this effector gets closer to these clones, they turn white, right? As it moves away, they go back to being black. And that's happening because the weight of the effector is affecting not only the position of these little cubes, but also the emissive value that we set up, right? So notice how it kind of fades on. That's this sort of fall off area, and it's brightest in the middle right there when we're right in the center, and then it falls off again. Now we can use this black and white setup as a mask to control the emissive color. So jumping back into the material, what we're going to do is, instead of using this effector total weight to control the color directly, we're going to create a linear interpolate. And that is basically saying, like, if it's black, it's one color, if it's white, it's another color, and if it's gray, it's a mix of the two, right? So what I'm going to do is just drag this out here like this. I'm going to choose LERP, which is short for linear interpolate. And I'm going to hold Alt and break that connection there right now. And I'm going to set this B value to this color, and A is set to 0, which is black. And then I'm going to take this effector total weight and I'm going to use that as a mask. And so now if I hit apply and save, what I can see is as this moves in, they turn blue. It's pretty cool. Now from there, if I want it to really glow, right, what I can do is come back into here and I can multiply the color so that it glows more. So I'm just going to right click right here and I'm going to choose multiply. And from there, I'll set up a value. Right now it's set to 1. I could either just use the value that's right here and just type it in. I could say something like 20 and click on apply and save. And if we look, we can see how much more it's glowing. Or I can create a value that I can control in the material. So I can right click on this and I can choose promote to parameter, and I can set this to emissive strength. And just to make things more organized, I could then go here and type in for the group, I could call it emissive is the name of the group. And this will be the first value. So I can say 1, and this will be, again, part of that same group emissive, and this will be value 2. And if I were to go now, and if I look in the parameters of this effect, I can see that now I've got this base color, but in the emissive section right here, I've got emissive color and emissive strength. And the way that this kind of translates out is if I right click on this and I choose create material instance, now I've got a child of that material. And when I jump in, I can see there's my base color and here's my emissive stuff right here. So they're separated out into different groups. Now, you may notice that it's black and not glowing, and that's because I made a mistake, a small one. Back here in the materials, the emissive strength is set to 0, so I can set that to 1, or I can set it up to something much higher if I want. But either way, if I set it here like this, and I come over here, I've got this group with the emissives, and I can check either of these and then just play with the values. And something worth noting is that the great thing about material instances is that they update in real time. Material masters do not. Anything with the uses the node system won't update in real time. But here, I can just pull this back and I can make changes. I can set the emissive strength up really high, and I can make this orange or whatever. And you can see these update immediately, so I can just see it right away. Now, I'm going to go back to the master material right here, and I'm just going to grab all the stuff that we created here, all of this, right? And I'm going to copy it. So hit Control C, and then let's move back to our Tron project. Now let's take what we've built and bring it into the material for our light cycle. So I'm going to select one of the clones on the light cycle, and if I click on this button right here, it navigates to the material. Now I want to get to the master, not the instance, but let's say we didn't know where the master was. You can open up the instance, and then you can choose hierarchy, and then choose the master from the pull down. Now, before I show you this whole material, I wanted to show you how it works. Just so you know, this is set up in kind of like these zones where different parts of the UV of the model are put into different areas of the UV map, right? So any part that's yellow paint is over here in this map, and then we've got silver and then white, you know, for the little spokes that glow, and then the windows, and then this is the wheels, right? So I can change the color of these sections, and by doing this, I'm actually just changing one area of what is essentially like a texture for it. So you can change that. You can choose to play with the emissive, bring that up a bunch. You know, I could also change the chrome color to something else if I wanted to. Anyway, I'm going to leave these alone. And I was only showing you that so you understood when I jump into the master material here, what you can see is this is actually a very complex material with these different zones. None of this really matters too much, but really what you can see is that the emissive part, for example, that ends up over here is built of the emissive for the spokes, the emissive for the windows, the emissive for the wheels, the emissive for the chrome, and for the paint color. And, you know, even though that they're not generally glowing, because I wanted to create that 1980s look, I've given them all just a slight bit of emission, 0.1, except for the spokes on the wheels, which are fully emissive. Anyway, all that to say, they all come together into this one little output called emissive. And that's what I've got connected here to the emissive color pin. So let's take what we built and drop it in and then just kind of arrange things. I'm just gonna hit Control V, and that brings everything down here. And what we're gonna do is take the emissive pin and drop it here into the A position for the lerp. That was black in our last example, but here, whatever the emission is normally, right, whatever's coming out of this emissive little node right here, that's going to be A when the effectors are not near the cloner. But when the effectors are near the cloner, we're going to get this blue color. So let me just break this right here by just dragging that out. So watch again. If the effectors are not near the cloner, then we see this. That's A. If the cloners are near the effector, then we see this blue. That's right here. And that goes into this emissive color pin. Let me save it. And if we go back into the instance, we can see that at the bottom now, here we have this emissive color section that's been added. So we can change the emissive color and we can change the emissive strength. Anyhow, I'm going to save this and just come take a look. And you can see that it's turning blue now based on where these effectors are. You come back to the outliner, close up this cloner. I noticed that this whole setup is a little weird. Let's come back to camera, set it to default viewport, which I like. Pull back. Okay, so I can move this through and they're blue. Now, if I jump back into the instance, I can set that emissive strength up to like 20 or even 50. Let's go. Hit save. And now as this moves through, it glows. Now, if I really want that glow, because I haven't added this yet, let's also add in a post-process. So I'll just click on here and I'll choose the visual effects section right here. And we're going to go to post-process volume. And since I want this effect to take place on everything, not just whatever's inside of this little volume that's right here. Here, let me pull this out so you can see. Basically, the effect will only happen inside this cube, and I don't want that. So in the post-process volume, I'm going to hit infinite. And infinite extent unbound sets it so that everything, no matter whether it's in the cube or not, will be affected by this post-process. And then I'm just going to go over to bloom. And I'm going to crank up the intensity. Now you're also seeing a lens flare, which I really don't want. So let me just type in flare and go to the lens flare intensity and set that down to 0. And then come back here and type bloom again. And we've got the intensity. We can play with the threshold so that not everything glows, right? We can lower it, like by bringing that threshold up, then these white lines won't glow. And only this emissive area will glow. So now let's grab hold once again of our effectors right here. That's pretty good. Now the thing is, if we come back in and look at our master material, one thing we note is that basically it's using the effector weight. The problem is that we've got 2 effectors and that's double the weight. And I'd love to just kind of calm that down a little bit, especially because I'm going to add one more to control glow as an additional process. So what I'm going to do is just take the value that's coming out of here and I'm just going to add a multiply to it. And I'm going to say multiply by 0.5, and that will make it half the value of that white that comes out of here. So now if I click on apply, it's a little like the fall off is a little better. So we've got the brightest areas, but over here it's not as bad. So if I were to, again, just so we can see, we'll show the difference right here. I'm going to set that multiply value back to 1, and I'm going to save, and you can see how much brighter it gets. So I want it to be at 0.5. Maybe even 0.3. And the reason is because now I'm going to add in a third effector. So let's do this. I'm going to select my scale effector right here, and I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to turn this one, and I'm going to name this one to glow. Then I'm going to go into its settings for all the different things it's doing. In this case, it was doing scale, and we can see that scale was set to 0. I'm going to just reset this so that it's all at 1, right? So now the scale is doing nothing. This whole offset thing, which was before scaling it and making it glow, is now only making it glow. And I'm going to take this one, and I'm just going to move it back just slightly, just a little bit like that. And now if I grab hold of my effectors, we do this, and you can see there's a little nice fall off that even though it's no longer being displaced, these little squares are no longer being pushed out, they're just kind of glowing a little bit. I'm also going to jump back into this material and maybe lower this emissive strength to 20. That's pretty good, maybe even 30. And I'll click on save. And now I can animate this by selecting my effectors here and going into the sequencer and just dropping this in right here. And I'm just going to add a transform position right here and move to the first frame. And for transform, I'm just going to hit location for the X. And I'm going to move this back over to here. And then near the end there, I'll just move this up and get it as far as I can so that there's no longer an effect there. And play it out. And that's pretty fast. So that's because I'm working at a really high frame rate and also with a small sequencer. So I'll set this to 24 frames per second. And I'm going to set this out point to 120. Just go there or near there, you know, something like that. And set the endpoint and then just animate this just like that. Pretty cool. And I do want to change that color back to the orange that originally was. So we'll just go back here and set the emissive color to orange, which I think is going to be a better color that matches with this all better. And click on save and let's try it again. Yeah, that looks really good. I don't know about you, but I think that that was worth the 30 minutes it took just to get here. And of course, the next time you do this, it's going to go much faster now that you know how this all works. But I think we can take this further with creating the X-ray sort of frame that comes before the light cycle so that the pieces form around the frame. So let's do that now. To make that happen, let's bring ourselves back to the original mesh that we used. We're going to come back to here under right here by mesh, by light cycle classic. We had our light cycle unified. We're going to drop that in and we're going to reset the position. Now, of course, you notice it's glowing and you're like, what the heck's going on? Well, we created a material that was designed to work with cloners and glow when an effector was near it. But this material does not know what to do with itself because this isn't a clone and it's just kind of doing whatever it thinks it should, which is act like it's fully affected. So we're gonna have to correct for that too. Let's head back to the materials over here and I'm gonna duplicate the master for that light cycle that we were using that has the glow. And I'm just gonna just drag it and choose copy. And I'm gonna rename this to Fresnel. And we're gonna use a Fresnel effect to create the look of, you know, this sort of X-ray. So I'm going to hop in there now into this Fresnel effect and this Fresnel material. And I'm going to just get rid of everything that we did right here. Let's re-link our emissive back over there and just delete the rest of this. Okay. And I'm going to click on apply. And, you know, I'll make a child of this, right? So we just choose create material instance. And then I'm going to drag that onto the different parts of the motorcycle. First the wheel, then the other wheel, and then finally the main body right here. Then I'm going to hop into the master material and we're going to create the Fresnel for opacity. But right now the opacity channel is hidden. That's because this material is set to be a surface opaque material. I'm going to change this from surface opaque to, why don't we go with either translucent or additive? I think additive is going to be great in this case. And then let's create the Fresnel effect. And the Fresnel effect is kind of like a fall off where the outside is brighter than the inside, and we can use that as a mask. So I'll right click, I'll choose Fresnel and Fresnel function. And if I hook this up just as it is to the opacity, well, what we see is that in the middle, it's a little bit clear, like it's almost completely transparent, and then it gets brighter on the edges, kind of like a bubble. And I can just work with the power here. So I'll promote that to a parameter. And I'll set this to 20, maybe even 10 just for now. And what that looks like, you can see it sort of looks like a bubble because the outer parts are showing and the inner parts are invisible. Now I do want this to be brighter, and the fastest way to do that is just to take our emissive result and to multiply that. And so I'm just going to hold the emissive pin right there, drag it onto the middle of this chain, and I'm going to type in multiply. And I'll just choose multiply again, and I'm going to promote this multiply, you know, value into a parameter, and I'll call this emissive strength, and we'll set this to 20 for now. And now you can see this outline much better. Okay, click apply, save, and look at that. So now we've got this light cycle that we see the outlines. And again, if we want those lines to be even tighter, right, I can go back into the Fresnel instance right here, and I can play with that. I can make them, right now they're set to 10. I can set that to 15. and that tightens up the lines even more. If I wanted to make this glow even more, I could set it to 50, it gets brighter. But I do want it to really glow, so maybe I'll bring it up to like 100, and if not that, maybe even 500. And there we go, that's looking really good. So now if we jump back to the sequencer and we play, what we can see is that this light cycle is building around the frame that was created by this fresnel material. But now I want this fresnel material to wipe on as well, and we can't use the cloning system or any of that to make this work. I actually tried originally to divide this into little pieces and then have it, but the fresnel material doesn't like that. Any edges, it starts creating stuff so that you end up with like cubes that you can see on the inside, which might look cool, but I actually didn't do what I wanted it to do. I wanted this just to be the outline. So you can play with that and give that a shot, but I'm going to show you what I think is the best solution in this case. Now to make this happen, I'm going to have to take you on another side quest. Yay! So let's take a look at this. There are different ways of sort of masking an object, and some of them are more processor intensive, like Booleans, and some of them don't give you what you ultimately are going to need, like the masking tools. But I wanted to show you all of these so you understand what we're going to do here. So the motion design tools come with a couple of different really cool things. If we go to operator stack right here, we've got modifiers and animators. The modifiers are pretty cool. Now these spheres are, this is a motion design sphere. You can see it's live, like there's a uniform scale and you can control how many sides there are. So if you want to have more or you want it to have less, right? So these are dynamic objects. If your object is not dynamic, right? Let's say it's one of these, let's go to shapes and cube and drag it right here. This is not a dynamic cube. Then when you go into the modifiers, what you'll see is one of them is called dynamic mesh converter. And that's what you'll want to turn on if you want to use the Booleans or some of the other features as well. But in this case, these are already dynamic. So I'm going to select first the sphere, and I'm going to choose modifiers and go to add modifiers. And if I look here, one of the options is Boolean. And I'm going to tell it that it is the target, and it's on channel 0, meaning that like it's going to interact with other objects that are all on the same channel. Then I'm going to take this cube right here, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to choose add modifiers. I'm going to choose Boolean, but I am going to choose, instead of target, I'm going to choose that it should subtract from the other object, right? So now when I move this in, look what happens. And let me bring this forward. And this is really cool. And this could be a great way actually to use our effect. But the problem is that when an object is complex, and I don't mean like a sphere, I mean like the light cycle, which has got tons of little parts and lots of geometry, it may slow down a lot, so that animating is really not the way to go. You could try this. I did not find that it worked very well, and I'm on a really awesome super upgraded computer that I just got from Puget Systems. So I would say like this is an alternative, but it's not the way I would go. Plus, you see how it's creating these walls? Like wherever it cuts out, it's creating this sort of wall that gets rid of the hole. And I actually want to see inside of it to get the full effect. So it's not the ideal choice for the X-ray effect that we're going to create. But you can see, by the way, that instead of subtract, you could try something like intersect, and only where these objects intersect, that's where we're going to see that. Or you could try union, and you know, I'm not really 100% sure like what the value of that one is in this case, but it creates sort of like a singular object. Now, another way that you can do this is with masking tools. So basically, I would say I want this cube to mask the sphere. It's not the same as a Boolean. It's more like an After Effects mask that covers another layer. So let's connect this just like this. And I'm going to go over to the operator stack, and I'm going to choose add modifier. We're going to go mask layer input for the cube. And for the sphere, I'm just going to go to add modifiers and choose mask layer output. And what you end up with is not really a Boolean or a sort of subtraction of the object. It's just a mask. So as you can see, wherever this cube is touching the sphere, that's what I can see. But you can see how it loses its sort of shape, and it's not really 3D. If I turn it like this, it almost looks like it's a complete cube, but that's only because it's being masked by the cube shape, and that's filling the area, right? So like here, I can see the whole sphere. So it's not really ideal for the kind of effect we want either. Both of these tools are really powerful and have their place in the motion design package, but they're not going to do the job. So ultimately, I needed a third alternative, one that was not native to Unreal. And the solution that I came up with was creating a situation in which the material itself can read the position of a 3D cube, right? And so when this cube comes in contact with the sphere, it will either hide it or reveal it. So I can also set the invert there. And so when it touches it, then we see it. And to make it easier to work with, there's a couple of different settings. There's a show cube, so we can actually see where that cube is. And it's also got some feathering, which you're seeing right around the edges here. You can set the feathering down to 0 if you want it to be really sharp. And again, the invert button that we used before. So let me just hide this now. Now it's very sharp and moves around. And basically wherever they're interacting, wherever the cube is touching the object or within it, that's where the material will show up. Otherwise it'll be invisible, or if it's reversed, that's where it'll be opaque. And basically the way that it works is that there's a blueprint with the cube inside of it. And within the material for the sphere itself, we have to add a material function. So I'll just double click to open this. That's called box mask reveal, and it plugs into the opacity or the opacity mask if you're working with a mask material. This one is translucent. So the next step would be to integrate this into that material that creates the Fresnel effect. But that comes with its own complication because it already has something working in the opacity, right? That's the Fresnel mask to work with the opacity. We have to link it up all together. So let's do that here where it's easy to work with, and then we can copy and just paste it into the other material. So here I've got the light cycle set up with a very basic Fresnel material, and I want to use that blueprint that we have, this cube mask actor, to subtract from here. Now we need to add in that material function. And so if we come here back to cube mask reveal, and under material there's a material function called box mask reveal. You can either drag that in, or you can right click and you can choose box mask, and you'll see that there's a box mask reveal right here. And we have to choose now, how do we get this in here? We have to, like if you choose one, it breaks the other one, right? The other one comes apart. So we have to find a way to combine them. And the way to do this is to subtract. I'm going to take a subtraction here. I'm going to subtract from this Fresnel using this. And now I'm going to hit apply, and there it is. So if I move my blueprint around, right? So I've got this, let's grab this cube mask actor right here, move this around, we're able to reveal it. Or I can invert it and hide it. Although I think revealing is what I would ultimately like to do. Okay, so in the material, I'm just gonna grab hold of this, right, like that, and just hit Control C, and let's jump back into the other project. And just so you can see why it matters, so this box, I'm just going to make the box show cube. It's very, very large. And based on how the previous mask that we looked at work, I should not be able to see that motorcycle behind it, even when the cube is invisible. But I can, because it's actually being used to cut the material, not to block the object. And that was the key difference. And that's why I needed this solution. So now back in our main project where we've got this Fresnel material on our light cycle, I'm just going to hit Control V and paste in the new version, which is pretty much this plus the subtract and the material function. And I'm just going to drag this up to opacity and just delete this. And again, so you can see, let me get it nice and tight there. We connect it all to the opacity right here. From here, I just want to hit save. And now it needs our 3D cube to be added into the scene. So I'm just going to go over to the content browser, grab this blueprint right here, drop it in, and I'm going to hit reset on the position. And I'm going to make the cube invisible, but I'm also going to make it bigger so it reveals more of our light cycle. So let me just make this bigger, break the chain there, go wider, and definitely higher so it shows more of the light cycle. And then it's just going to be a question of animating this on just like that. So let's do that. Now, normally you'd think, hey, I should just drop this in with the effectors and it can animate along with them. Unfortunately, there is a limitation in how this box mask thing works, that it's got to be animated on its own. So really what I can do is take the keyframes for the animation here. I can just copy them and just drop our blueprint right here. Let me just grab it. Drop it in here. And add a transform. And for location X here, I can try to do the same thing. I can just select it and hit paste. And now it's following it, but I want it to come on just a little bit earlier. I think that's actually looking pretty good. And then as it moves, it disappears. So that's looking pretty good. Check that out. If I want to offset it slightly, I can do that. I can maybe move these so that they come even sooner, maybe starting over here. And that looks good too. And I think, we can make this even brighter if we want to. Set this to like 1,000. And we get some nice glints and glares over there. And yeah, so one more time, let's look at it in the sequencer. And I think that's looking really solid. And you can use these same techniques with motion design. So for example, I've got some text here and it's some live text, grabbed it here from the text actor right here. You can drop that in if you want. And once I've got the text and set up the way that I do, I'll choose actor, convert text 3D actor to static mesh. And I'll just call it future text and click on save. And then I'm just going to drag this text into the scene. And I'm going to hide this just by moving the 3D text below. So now I've got just this static mesh that I've got here. And then I'm going to go into the fracture mode like I did before. I'm going to create a new geometry collection. And then I am going to go over to brick and I'm going to go with an 8x8x8 grid. I'm going to fracture everything. And I'm also going to go down into the materials. And I'm going to assign a second material. So let's add a material slot. And for the internal material, I've got this glowing pink one that I want to use. So I'll just bring that over there. I'll make sure that assign materials for the internal material is set to 1 and assign the material. Then I'm going to go to 2Mesh. And we're going to convert each of these little pieces into a static mesh like we did before. Make sure that center pivots is on and that odd materials, our internal is off, and hit convert. And then I'm just going to create a folder called pieces. And I'm going to save that. Then I'm just going to go back into my outliner and like before, delete the original geometry collection because it's conflicting with the little pieces that I've got in there. And then I'm just going to go back into the motion design mode and I'm going to grab a cloner, specifically the free placement cloner, drop that in. Let's reset the position of that and the rotation. And then let's remove the default clone. And we're going to grab hold of all these little pieces right here. And make sure that we set them to movable. And once they're movable, we can drop them inside the cloner. And now that I've done that, I can go into my effector section on the cloner and I can create a linked effector. And I'm going to go with noise or procedural, and then I'll choose curl noise. And let's remember to crank up, not too high actually, because we're going to raise the frequency. So just a little bit here and there. And then let's bring this frequency up quite a bit. And so when I move this effector through, looks pretty good. So you can find cool ways to use these techniques for motion design in addition to doing visual effects. Okay, you stuck with me for 45 minutes on the rezzing process. Let's quickly look at de-rezzing, the process of destroying an object in the Tron universe. So we're going to kind of dial it back to where we were originally. We're going to take our light cycle, our unified light cycle. So I've got that in here. So you can just go back and bring it back in here. And what we're going to do is reset that, is we're going to fracture it again. So let's go to the fracture mode and let's choose to add a new geometry collection. And we'll go to the fracture section right here that we created. And here I'm just going to call this one GC Light Cycle 2 and create geometry collection. From here, I'm just going to go back to where we did before, going to brick, and I'm going to set it to 12 by 12 by 12 again, and I'm going to fracture it. Once that's done, I want to create a material that will glow. So I'll go into material section here, and I'm just going to create a new material, and we'll call this glow. And it's going to work a lot like the ones we've done before. Let me just hop in there into this material. Base color can be black. The emissive color, let's promote to a parameter. I'm going to make that yellow or orangish like that. And I'm going to add the multiplier to it, just like that. And I'm going to promote that to a parameter as well. And this will be our emissive strength. And I'll just promote this to a parameter, keep it black. And I'm going to set the emissive strength up to something like 30 for now. And I'm going to save it. Then I'm just going to create a material instance so that I can work with it. I'll call glow instance. And what I'm going to do is in this light cycle geometry collection, I'm going to go down to the materials again, just like we did before. And for the second material, we're going to create a material slot, a second material, that's the internal one. And we're going to apply this glow instance to that second slot. And then we're going to go down here and we're going to choose assign material 1. That's the second slot to the insides of this object that's going to break apart. Now that that's done, just go back to the selection mode. And again, I can turn off the bone color here so we can see things as they are, so that even though there's glowing materials inside, from the outside, it looks great. From here, if I were to run simulations, probably not much would happen. The damage threshold for the object is pretty high right now, so we can come in and change that. So I'll just make sure that my geometry collection is selected, scroll down, and you'll see that there's a damage section right here. And I can just scroll this down right here, and that first damage threshold is really high, 50,000 or something like that, maybe even 500,000. I'm going to set that to 5,000, and let's see what happens when we do that. That was pretty cool. Now, if you want to try something a little more controlled so that you can sort of like explode it in parts, or you can have it get damaged when it hits a wall, or you can just have it explode at a particular time, we have something called fields that will help us with this. So coming back over to our damage settings, I'm going to reset this back to the original threshold. And then I'm going to type in right here in my search bar, making sure that I'm in the all section right here. I'm going to type in FS_, and that brings up a whole bunch of different field systems. And so what I want to grab from here right now is this master field. And right now, by default, it's set to explode at 1 second. If you check, it's got a delay of 1 second. So if I were to run the timer here, nice, right? So sits for a second and then it explodes. But because a lot of dynamic objects, just from the fact that they've got different parts, will sometimes just fall apart when you run simulations, what I would suggest we do first is setting this from dynamic to kinematic. And then on this part right here, on this master field, type in the word switching and force dynamic switch. When we do this, if this object comes in contact with this field, then it will react and become dynamic. Until then, it won't be. So let's bring this back over here. And then I'm going to set this to not be delayed, right? So let's just get rid of delay, just go on tick. And if I play now and I just drag this over there, boom, it falls apart. Now, it didn't quite all fall apart the way it should have fell down, but you know, that's what we got here. And if I were to move this down, it would all fall apart that way. And while that didn't look great, the good news is we can use this field system to have like the light cycle crash into walls and explode and whatnot. And this is pretty cool. Now, the thing is, you might think that, hey, I'll just set up a field right in front of the wall and that'll work, but it's not great. Like I find that when I do this, like the results look a little bit like, you know, it's cool, but like parts don't get in because it triggers it too soon. So the solution that I have found is to actually animate the position of this field system. So let's come here, let's say right before it crashes into that wall. So we'll go one right there. This is where I want this keyframe for this thing to come down. So if I had no keyframes there, let's set it right here. I'm going to set this to a constant keyframe so that it jumps up. And really over here, I'm just going to have it just up here. So now it comes down just as the light cycle is crashing into the wall. And if we run this simulation, let's take a look. Yeah, that's looking really good. And if you feel like stuff is flying too far apart and, you know, hopping around too much, so things that you can do to really clean that up are we can select the light cycle and I can go into the dampening, right? So type in damp and I can bring the linear dampening to 1, maybe bring this to 0.5 on the angular damping. And if we hit play now, it should sort of just bring everything tighter together and stuff isn't bouncing around like crazy. But even if it is, there's another field system that we can use, and it's called the sleep disable generic field. And so I'm going to drop this in. Now there's a sleep field which when you hit a certain threshold, the particles just stop doing stuff. But I find the sleep field in the sleep mode doesn't work great. I'm going to try something else, which is it has 3 modes. It has sleep, disable, and kill, and I'm going to choose disable. So first let's just set the size right for how big we want this thing. Make it big like that, and you know, something like that. And I'm gonna, so I want this to be probably about as high as I think it should be, and maybe even there. Okay, so I'm gonna go into this right now, set the threshold to something like 10. And then I'm going to go into the field behavior and I'm going to choose disable. And let's just see what happens right away without moving it or animating it at all. So let's hit the play button here again and let's see what happens. And you can see they just all basically eventually just stop, right? These got kind of caught in a weird position because it was too high. So let's see if we move this even lower. Let's see what happens here. Move this back this way. Move it even lower. Let's just see what happens when we do that, if that's enough to get them. Maybe not enough. Maybe I should just bring this a little bit higher and play it one more time. We can see it, all the pieces sort of just drop there. Yeah, that's pretty good. So that alone, we could just leave it there like that and have this thing play out. But I would want a little more bouncing there. So the way that we're going to do that, instead of having it just be there right away, we're going to set a keyframe for its position, just like we did for this field right here. So I'm going to drop the sleep system into the sequencer, and I'm going to add transform, and I'm going to change the location of it right here. Let's actually bring this to the end right after it crashes, give it a little bit of time here, and then I'm going to take this, and then I'm going to take this back over here and move this down. And you know what, actually I want it to sort of slowly rise, so why don't we just have it right about there, rise up just like that. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's pretty good. All right, let's watch that one more time. Yeah, it looks really good. Now, this same technique could be used for motion design. So for example, I've got this text here, and I've got my field that's going to come down and slowly dissolve the text. And, you know, so it looks like this, right? And what we'll do is just kind of play it, and then I'll walk you through quickly how I did that. So we're just going to play this, and you can see it slowly just kind of dissolves, which is pretty cool. Now, the way to set this up is to start with a 3D text actor. I've kind of jumped back a little bit, and I've got this text actor. And basically the way you add that is you'd go over to the motion design tools, and you'd go into actors, and you would choose text actor, and you might add that in, and so on and so on. So I've already set up this text actor, and you can see that it's currently live. If I wanted to change the words, and you can see that there, it's still live right at this point. But we have to make it a static mesh instead of being live text. So with the text selected, I'm going to choose actor and go to convert text 3D actor to static mesh. and I can choose where to save it. I'll go, just for now for content, I'll just save it as static mesh text, and I'll save that. And I'm going to take static mesh text and drop it right there. I'm going to reset the position, and I'm going to get rid of the 3D text actor and just kind of position this the way I want it. And from here, we're going to just do what we did before, which was turn it into a geometry collection. So I'll go over to my fracture stuff here, and I'll turn it into a new geometry collection, and I'll save that. And then I will go over to the brick section here, and I'm going to fracture this at 8 by 8 by 8. That's a bunch, but let's make it happen. And that happened actually pretty fast. How many pieces is this in total? It's like 1,700 pieces. Okay, so from here, the critical thing is this, is that I want to, again, I'm going to hide the bone color on these things, right? So we'll go bone, we'll show the bone colors no more, and this is how it looks, and it looks really good. But the key is, watch what happens. If I start this now and I play, what's going to happen is it's just kind of all fall apart at once. And the reason that's happening is because we have to turn on the dynamic switching for this text, right? So with my text selected, if I go to dynamic, I can set the object type from dynamic to kinematic. And remember, this here is set to switch, force dynamic switch. That's our force. So when the force comes in contact with these pieces, they will slowly break down. So let's see what that looks like. Yeah, much cooler, right? And you can play with some of the different settings to make it not explode as big. But yeah, you get the idea how this could be used in motion design. Again, we'll just do it one more time. And, you know, you could also, if you wanted to animate this coming in from the side, for example, here, let me just get rid of our keyframes on this. Just move this over to the side a little more. And we'll set a keyframe for the location. And then over time, we'll have it come through. Let's see what happens there. Right, so you can see how you can use this in your motion design. Now, often the question gets asked, what if I have to have my object animated? Like maybe the wheels are rotating, or maybe it's a person and it's articulated, like their hands are moving, their arms are moving. You can't have that be the geometry collection. So the way to handle that is at the last second to switch out your object, your animated object, for the geometry collection. That's really easy to do. I'm just going to go into the sequencer here, and actually I'm going to grab my blueprint of the light cycle, drop it right in here. I'm going to make it the child of my geometry collection, and I'm going to reset the position so that they're in the same place. And then I'm just going to, for the sake of setting this up, I'm going to just make the geometry collection visible. I'm going to go into the sequencer. I'm going to take this blueprint, drop it in, and you can see when I click on this button here, I have the option of animating different parts. I'm going to choose the wheel back for now, and I'm just going to put a transform in there, and then I'm going to do rotation. I'll do pitch, and you know, just for the sake of getting this done, we're going to animate it a few times like that. So now over here, it's animated. Over here, eventually, so like it hits, but you can see it's still animating, right? And what we're going to do is just swap out these two objects. So with this BP Light Cycle Classic in there, I'm going to choose Actor Hidden in Game, and I'm going to set this to visibility on with a keyframe at the beginning, and right at the point of impact, so right here, I'm going to set its visibility to off. And I'm going to do the same thing for our GC light cycle, right? Our geometry collection. I'm just going to add in the actor hidden in game, and I'm going to set that to on at this point, and just come back here to the beginning and set it to off. And so now it swaps out, right? You can see how it was turning before. Now it swaps out. So this one's turning, and suddenly it's swapped out. And from there, all we've got to do is just hit play on the timeline. That works perfectly. So I think all in all, that's looking really good. Nice de-rezzing there. And I hope you have some fun with this stuff. Thanks for sticking with me on this one. Hopefully you've got a good grasp and some good ideas on how you can use these techniques to create some cool effects in motion design. As always, I hope that this helps you in your work. Once again, I'm Aharon Rabinowitz for School of Motion. See you in the next one.